Hello, horror hounds. You know, it's a bold man who decides that they're going to adapt The Phantom of the Opera and then thinks to himself, you know what I've always thought the Phantom could do without? That mask. We continue to work our way through the films of Dario Argento in order. And back when I rewatched and reviewed Opera, or also known as Terror at the Opera, I wondered why it had taken him so long to set one of his films in that milieu. His style of filmmaking and the world of opera seemed to be such natural bedfellows. He certainly made the setting, the worlds behind the scenes and on stage, the music, the egos, the drama work for his particular brand of lavish, passionate, violence-fueled art murder nightmarescape. So when his focus turns from merely alluding to Gaston Leroux's masterpiece to adapting and remaking The Phantom of the Opera, what bold new version of this iconic horror character might be conjured? Raise your hands if you said human rat traps, rat-aided masturbation, steampunk ratmobiles, Turkish bath, full frontals, and the Phantom fucking Christine from behind twice. The drop-off in quality control between his entire canon up to this point and the Phantom of the Opera is astounding. Even if you don't particularly like some of his earlier films, there's no denying the panache, the creativity, and intent behind them. It's the sense of intent that's missing with The Phantom of the Opera. It's completely rudderless. The film takes place in the 1800s. It's Argento's first stab at a period piece, and the costumes are wonderful. The settings are real opera house and real caves used for the catacombs beneath the opera house. I mean, they're real, point and shoot, like them well in Point and Shoot. They all look great. The film itself, not so much. It begins with an opening sequence lifted straight out of Tim Burton's Batman Returns. A couple set their young baby adrift in the sewers of Paris inside a Moses basket, and the baby is saved by a rat with, I swear to God, glowing red eyes. And then the child is seemingly reared by the swarm of furry critters. This poses so many questions that I completely understand that this scenario. The same is true of the penguin being raised by some penguins in Batman Returns, but at least in Tim Burton's movie, it's a hyper-real comic book story, a comic book character in a movie where someone else in it is brought back to life, brought back from the dead by some cats. Disbelief can be suspended, but you can't leave it dangling like Harold Lloyd from the face of a clock for the entire length of your movie. When you spend your time whilst watching The Phantom of the Opera wondering how nutritious rat milk might be for a human baby, and then a little bit later wondering how the rat actually got the child out of his basket before he drowned in the inevitably rising tide of piss and shit, you start to suspect that your movie might be in a little bit of trouble. Whilst the other question that went through my mind is valid for every incarnation of the Phantom, this is the only Phantom of the Opera movie I've seen where I found myself pondering how he got his organ down into his lair while I was watching it. Recounting it all now to you, the whole affair sounds gloriously bonkers, and I'll definitely be watching it again. I'll just be doing it with friends and alcohol. I find myself wondering if this is supposed to be a comedy. Argento's certainly proven to have a tin ear for comedy, and it's at least plausible that he thinks he's made an absolute rib tickler. There's no getting around the fact that it's simply a bad movie. It's tonally all over the place. There's no narrative focus from one scene to the next, let alone over the course of the feature. The characters, if you can call them such, are inconsistent and downright confusing. Up until now, all of Dario Argento's movies have contained mysteries. The identity of a killer, the clue partially remembered or misremembered, the source of supernatural evils and goings on. Whereas The Phantom of the Opera is his first film that just It just sort of happens. Raised by rats? Sure. Christine and Eric fall in love within 60 seconds? It's reasonable. They can communicate telepathically. Well, it cuts out a lot of time required to develop their relationship. Remains of the Day would have been a lot more straightforward if Emma Thompson could have read Anthony Hopkins' mind after all. I tried, I promise you, to find connections in this film with the exploration of themes and images that we've discussed at quite some level of detail in reviews for his previous films. The Medusa image appears again in the two films preceding this, the Stendhal Syndrome and Trauma. The image of the Medusa or the Medusa's head featured symbolically in both. Here, the Phantom gives Christine a Medusa ring to reportedly help her find her way through the labyrinth under the opera house to his lair. In those two previous films, the Medusa was a literary signifier of the deadly power of a wronged woman. Her decapitated head alluded in Trauma to the killer who collected heads, and it stood in the Stendhal Syndrome as well as Trauma for the power of art and revenge. The Medusa ring in The Phantom of the Opera has no such metaphorical power. It's just a thing, never referred to. It's Medusa for Medusa's sake. Likewise, in Phenomena, Opera and Trauma, some characters seem to have a drive towards nature. They're anti-killers from these films, and they succumb to an urge to eschew human contact and surround themselves with nature and particularly insect life. So in The Phantom of the Opera, raised by animals, as he is, with no human contact, he's surely the ideal of this urge expressed in previous films. Yet his kinship with nature seems to be there only to justify him coming across all Lord Byron one minute and biting out people's tongues the next. Oh, that and the fact that he seems to like covering his naked torso with rats whenever he wants to tug on the little Phantom, with a naked Dario Argento in the next room, right after they've just had sex. I'm not making this up. All of Argento's previous films seem to have a consistent theosophy. Whether it can be understood by us or not, I felt Argento applying his own personal system of occult or dream symbology to his stories. The Phantom of the Opera does not feel a piece with any of his previous works. It feels at times like Sam Raimi's Darkman by way of Terry Gilliam, and I know that sounds awesome, but it's not in this movie, because the movie you've got in your head would have the benefit of either Raimi or Gilliam's consistency of vision, something that the Phantom of the Opera desperately needs. Is Julian Sands' Phantom here a brooding gothic anti-hero in a lavish romantic reworking of a literary classic? Sometimes, yeah, in some scenes. Other times he's sexually assaulting a cartoonishly rendered prima donna to get her to quit the stage. At some points in the film, we spend time with a reporter who floats in and out of the movie and then is forgotten, determined to get to the bottom of the occurrences of the opera house. That's a cool story, let's follow him. That sounds like an interesting through line. Other times the film remembers it wants to develop a love triangle, and so that instantly just happens by having Christine's affections changing like a weather vane in a hurricane, sometimes changing backwards and forwards within the very same scene. At other times the film wants to hang out with the opera house's resident rat catcher and his midget assistants, who pickle the tails of every one of the thousands of rats that they've caught over the years. We even follow them on a wacky racist style adventure in the catacombs under the opera house as they ride their steampunk rat catching vehicle that literally hoovers up rats and dices them. Then we'll pop into a co-ed bathhouse for some equal opportunity nudity, and we'll never speak of it again. To wash away the taste of Dario Argento's Phantom of the Opera, the next night I actually had to watch Dwight Little's 1989 Phantom of the Opera, starring Robert Englund as the Phantom. Say what you will about this film, at least it has a purpose of vision and consistency that it strives for. Maybe with some beers, some friends, I can find some kind of communal enjoyment out of Dario Argento's Phantom of the Opera. It just saddens me that there's a film of his that can only be enjoyed by laughing at it. I will leave on a positive though. This film commits, really commits, to the chandelier coming down. Proper, practical gore effects, people being squashed, mangled. It's not just a big spectacle to have everyone scream and run out of the opera house. Many, many people die, and this is the only film that I can recall of the Phantom that doesn't shy away from that fact. I'm not sure why the Phantom has to bring it down being bare-chested in tight leather trousers whilst taking a sledgehammer to a concrete column like he was in some 80s AIDS awareness campaign. But there you go. Is it bizarre? Yes. Is it good? No. And as has been proven time and again, whenever Dario gets a critical pasting, he returns to the comfort zone of the giallo, and so it is true here. The next film we'll be looking at is Sleepless.